Hello. I've had cause to think about something just lately, and that is, why is it that some clever people don't agree with me on the existence of God and creation and all that goes with it? You see, who would listen to me? As a 15-year-old, I left school with an O level in English, and that was that. But some people that are academically quite gifted and talented and have worked hard in their particular field have concluded that there is no God. Should I be worried about that? Well, let's consider what exactly is going on here. Who is cleverer? Evolution is a word that comes from the Latin word evolutio. The word means an opening of what was rolled up. And the term is used in medicine, it's used in mathematics, and in general writing in various senses. We might even use it ourselves. It's about growth to maturity and development of an individual living thing. And it was first attested to in 1832 in works of a Scottish geologist by the name of Charles Lyell. You know, Charles Darwin used the word imprint only once in the closing paragraph of The Origin of Species in 1859. He preferred the term descent with modification, in part because evolution had already been used, and it was used in a homunculus theory of embryological development. The homunculus is a diminutive, fully formed human body historically believed to inhabit a germ cell, an egg, or a sperm, and to have the capacity to increase in size, giving rise to an adult man, human. This was discarded in the 18th century. The word homunculus is Latin for little man or little person. So it carried the sense that within each, in the cell, in the sperm, there is a little person, and that little person just grows to be the adult eventually. Well, it wasn't too late that Darwin popularized evolution in the term that we understand it today. Now, technically speaking, any change can be considered a type of evolution. I've evolved in my ability to do something. A child growing into an adult, a seed developing into a tree, the weather changing from summer to autumn, day turning into night. These are all forms of evolution because they are a change. We're not dealing here with evolution in this broad sense. Rather, I'm concerned with the doctrine of organic evolution. This special use of evolution can be defined in the following way. It's the hypothesis that millions of years ago, lifeless matter, acted upon by natural forces, gave origin to one or more minute living organisms, which have since produced all living and extinct plants and animals, including, of course, humans. Contrary to popular opinion and the oppressions of modern evolutionists, the idea of evolution is not new. It's not even a result of the advanced knowledge of our scientific age. Nor did the theory have its beginning with Charles Darwin and those of his contemporaries around about him who agreed with him. Nor is it helped by people such as Richard Dawkins. For well over 2,000 years, some have delved into this theory, which of course has had many and varied forms. As far back as 588 BC, a philosopher by the name of Thales presented his views of an evolving scale of life. We read about him. Thales believed that the earth floats on water and all things come to be from water. For him, the earth was a flat disk floating on an infinite ocean. The importance of Thales' idea is that he is the first recorded person who tried to explain such phenomena by rational rather than by supernatural means. 588 BC. Others were Anaximander in 570 BC, a student of Thales, Empedocles, 455 BC, who elaborates an account of the evolution of living forms of increasing complexity and capacity for survival, culminating in the creation of species as they are at present. These are all Greek philosophers. Strato, 288 BC, who devoted himself especially to the study of natural science and increased the naturalistic elements in Aristotle's thought to such an extent that he denied the need for an active God to construct the universe, preferring to place the government of the universe in the unconscious force of nature alone. Over the centuries, while being advanced by some scientists, the theory was never taken too seriously by most. These were interesting thoughts, but it couldn't possibly be. And it was never given any scientific connotation until, like I say, the 19th century, by men by the names of Huxley, Spencer, Lamarck, and Darwin, who began to pursue the issue further. But even then, these men did little more than revive these ancient Greek theories. The difference was that by the time of Darwin and his contemporaries, there was a significant difference in that the world was ripe for new avenues of thought. The so-called Dark Ages, which had kept the world in ignorance, was passing away. There was a spirit of extensive and free study, as opposed to the authoritative methods of the Catholic Church, the predominant church at the time. We read about this in Evolution and Revelation on page 86. The ironclad hand of Catholicism through the medieval period had become synonymous with religion and the Bible. And it was this distorted view of religion which many were rebelling against. Men were thinking for themselves, reaching out for an alternative to hold on to. The theory of evolution to some seemed to be the answer. It captured the imagination, and the obvious result was that many were swept up in this new wave of thinking. Anything was better than the Catholic Church, in other words. With the publication of The Origin of Species in 1859, the theory began to receive wider acclaim, though some of the greatest minds of the day opposed it. Dr. Adam Sedgwick was Darwin's professor, and he said, on reading the book, "I have read your book with more pain than pleasure. Parts of it I admire greatly, parts I laughed at until my sides were almost sore. Other parts I read with absolute sorrow because I think them utterly false and grievously mischievous." That's in a book called Evolution on page 46. The period following Darwin was, in the words of Dr. Edward O. Dodson, characterized by extreme enthusiasm together with an uncritical acceptance of whatever data were claimed to support Darwinism. Negative evidence was given little weight, while absurd extremes of interpretations in order to make observed facts fit Darwinian theory were quite common. We read that in a textbook of evolution, page 91. The evolutionary supposition became more of a religion than a science. The bulk of its dogma was accepted on faith, as is true even to today. When examining evolution, it's well to keep in mind that it has always been a very unstable and changing theory. Dr. Wilbert H. Rush points out, since the days of Darwin, his theory has undergone a complex development as well as a rather severe overhauling. Even Darwin himself lost faith in his early position of natural selection, and we read about that in Darwin, Evolution and Creation, page 24. There has always been wide disagreement among evolutionists. No less than half a dozen different and often contradictory views of the mechanism of evolution have been held. For example, pangensis. This is the theory of the transmission of acquired characteristics from generation to generation. Natural selection. Change brought about by the influence of the environment. Mutation. Sudden change in successive generations due to changes in genes. And there are many more. In view of all this, it is actually quite preposterous that the evolutionary hypothesis has in some circles come to be regarded as factual. And while most scientists, including many who actually believe in the theory, realise that it is unproven, yet evolution continues to dominate many areas of scientific thought and is taught as though it's fact in schools and universities. Why has there been such a widespread and continued acceptance of this unproven theory? It's sometimes asked, why do so many educated people believe it? Well, Dr. Henry Morris of the Virginia Polytechnic Institute has given a concise and accurate answer to this question. And he says, furthermore, the writer is convinced from having discussed the subject with hundreds of people that the main reason most educated people believe in evolution is simply because they have been told that most educated people believe in evolution. Very rarely is such a person able to do more than repeat a few stock evidence for evolution, and almost never has he given any really serious consideration to the question of their real implication. And that's found in Twilight of Evolution, page 26. From all outward appearance, it seems that the majority of educated people accept some kind of evolution. However, as Dr. Morris implies, this wide acceptance is not altogether based on study and investigation. In their book entitled Why Scientists Accept Evolution, Dr. R.E.D. Clark and Dr. James D. Bales point out this. Evolution is taken for granted today, and thus it is uncritically accepted by scientists as well as by laymen. It is accepted by them today because it was already accepted by others who went before them, and under whose direction they obtained their education. That's on page 106 of Why Scientists Accept Evolution. And again, further to this, they note, so widely accepted is the doctrine of evolution that it is received by each oncoming generation for the simple reason that each generation finds that evolution is part of the scientific world outlook in which it is reared. There is a strong and ever-growing tendency in educated circles to lean towards evolution, even if you don't actually believe it. Clark and Bales mention further to this, the tendency to conformity is so great that Solomon E. Ash pointed out that there are many people who will call white black in order to be in step with the times. Dr. Thomas Dwight observes this, how very few of the leaders of science dare tell the truth concerning their own state of mind. How many feel themselves forced in public to do lip service to a cult they do not believe in? And that's in Thoughts of a Catholic Anatomist, pages 20 and 21. In addition to all this, belief in evolution has apparently come about due to anti-religious, anti-biblical bias. This doesn't mean, however, that all believers of evolution have been anti-religious. No doubt there have been some supporters of evolution who were honest in their positions, who were sincerely seeking and endeavouring and searching to discover answers to the questions about life on earth, without reflecting on religion or the Bible. Let's face it, it is so often such a letdown for people where religion and the church and perceived Christianity is concerned that they think there must be an alternative, which is the case coming out of what is called the Dark Ages, the stranglehold that the Catholic Church in that day had on the people, and people wanted an alternative. And people might look at the religious world today and they want an alternative because it doesn't seem that the religious world today has anything of any value for them. There has been, on the part of many supporters of evolution, though, this undertone of resentment towards the Bible because of that, and especially the biblical account of creation. It doesn't sound clever enough. Now, it's said that if a lie is repeated often enough, it becomes accepted as the truth. And I believe this is what has happened with evolution. Remember, organic evolution is the gradual accumulation of genetic changes in populations of organisms over time that results in the transformation of species into new ones. The website Answers in Genesis states this: as time passes, Different populations lose genetic information as they naturally adapt to their surroundings, diverging genetically from other populations. Sometimes these divergences lead to organisms that cannot interbreed. Other times the organisms look dramatically different but can still interbreed. If we reverse the process and head back in time, we recognise that at creation, the number of created kinds must have been far fewer than the number of species we observe today. This is particularly significant when discussing such issues as how long it took for Adam to name the animals, and how all of the animals could have fit on board Noah's Ark. The biblical description of kinds is much broader than today's idea of species. Also, when we see variations of similar animals in the fossil record, we see it as different members of the same or similar kinds that naturally adapted to different habitats, becoming increasingly unique along the way. There are changes within species. That doesn't necessarily prove that one species becomes a totally different species. They are still the same kind. We didn't start as a blob and eventually became human. The theory of evolution that tries to put aside God and creation has come to be accepted because it has been repeated over and over and over again. So maybe what we should be doing as believers in God and in creation is talk about him over and over and over again. In Joel chapter 1 and verse 3, in regards to a terrible plague of locusts that the people of Israel were told to tell your children about it in the years to come, and let your children tell their children. Pass the story down from generation to generation. As the people of Israel prepared to settle down in the promised land, Moses warned them of dangers they must avoid. And in Deuteronomy chapter 8, he cautioned them about the perils of prosperity and self-satisfaction that they would face in their new home. He said, "Be careful that you do not forget the Lord your God, failing to observe his commands, his laws, and his decrees that I am giving you this day. Otherwise, when you eat and are satisfied, when you build fine houses and settle down, and when your herds and flocks grow large, and your silver and gold increase, and all you have is multiplied, then your heart will become proud, and you will forget the Lord your God, who brought you out of Egypt, out of the land of slavery." That's Deuteronomy chapter 8, verses 11 to 14. How fitting for us today. The word translated forget in this passage comes from a verb in the original Hebrew that means to stop remembering, to ignore, to dismiss from the mind, abandon, neglect, or cease to care about. This kind of forgetting involves putting the Lord out of your consciousness. Isn't this what atheists are doing when putting forward their brand of evolution? Moses knew that if the people were not careful in their comfortable, complacent, and prosperous state, in the land that was flowing with milk and honey, as it's described in Exodus 3 and verse 8, they would be tempted to dismiss from their minds God's miraculous parting of the Red Sea, the plagues that were sent on Egypt, the deliverance from slavery through it, his supply of manna in the desert when there was no other food, his drawing water from a rock when they were thirsty, his guiding presence, his protection, and even his discipline when they disobeyed. It would be all too easy for them to let the memory of God's past goodness fade. They would get tired of doing the things that God wanted them to do. They would become self-satisfied and think they'd achieved success all on their own and now they didn't need God. How clever. Forgetting the Lord would get the Israelites into trouble, leading them into the sin of idolatry and eventual destruction. Disaster would obliterate the abundant blessings that remembering God brings. Do not forget the Lord means consciously and consistently thinking about what God has done through his Son, Jesus Christ. When Moses said, do not forget the Lord, he meant for God's people to keep the truth of Scripture and the real life experiences of the living God certainly at the forefront of their minds. When things are going well, don't we quickly dismiss the truth that we've learned in the past? Don't we forget how we clung to God in the trials and the heartaches and difficulties of life? Those times when we were utterly dependent on him. But when things got better, what happened? The warning for Israel is the same for us today. Do not forget the Lord. May we thank God for his goodness, mindful that he is the giver of every good and perfect gift that we enjoy, according to James chapter 1. Remember and tell. Remember and tell. If you forget, you might end up believing we came from a glob of gloop in a pond and one day woke up human. The clever thing is to never ever forget that in the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth.